So on this particular day, then, I mean, for you, what happens? Is it just kind of a standard day, or the 1st of July? Because it's kind of a busy period, but yeah, everything's finished.
The decisions are made, already, locked and loaded and everything, but, really being able to engage with people, I need to think about what strategic directions I wanna take the programs that I run in the next year, because, of course, it's also Microsoft fiscal year. It's not just, MVP New Year, it's also Microsoft New Year. So, a lot of there are a lot of shifts. Of course, there's a lot of stuff that's already in play, in flight that we're still working on, and some things are working well, so we're not gonna make major changes, but, we're always looking for continuous improvement.
And I can imagine your Twitter starts pinging a little bit today as well, with thanks.
I yes, I have a good chunk of time set aside to look at both Twitter and, Facebook also because I am friends with many of my MVPs.
Right, yeah, that's a platform I tend not to frequent. I've avoided that. I used to be on it years ago and got to the point where I didn't want to look at people's food and things like that. So I moved away, and I use it just to promote the blog. Really, whenever anything is written, I'll tweet it out into some of the groups there. But yeah, it's an interesting little day where things happen. And also Garth Jones, I spoke to Garth last week, and he said I should wish you happy Canada Day today.
Well, thank you, Garth. Yes, yes, Canada Day, and then, of course, we're coming up on our 4th of July this weekend, so our big Independence Day is Saturday.
Yeah, so how is that going to be different then this year?
In a lot of ways, it won't be very different for us because we've never been big about going out to see fireworks. And in the past couple years, a lot of the larger fireworks displays ended up being dropped by their sponsors, and so we just didn't have some of the really big ones. So I've gone to smaller ones, or we've just gone over to neighbors' houses, and that's pretty much what's going to happen this year. Except, unlike last year where we had a big buffet that everybody shared food liberally and hugged each other when we saw each other, it's going to be, this friend has a very large piece of property with a very large field on it. So they're going to mark out spaces on the field and we'll just kind of each be in our own little space and they'll still set off fireworks.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so done in a kind of controlled manner, effectively.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, Cathy Moya, thanks ever so much for joining the Just a Couple of Jerks podcast for this episode.
So thrilled to be here. I'm really honored.
No, no, it's great to have you on board. So, Kathy, if people aren't aware of yourself, what's your role at Microsoft?
So my current role is on a team that we call the customer connection team. And this really deals with a lot of different um, ways that we connect with customers. So we have our user voice site, which I do some of the management of, but I'm transitioning some of the day to day of that to the people who are actually managing the feature streams. We also have some programs for customers who are under non-disclosure agreements or NDA that we actually call the Customer Connection Program, and so that's run by some of my coworkers. And we have programs for Microsoft Endpoint Manager. We do the customer connection work for the Windows for IT group and for Microsoft Defender ATP. And then we also have some work that we're doing now for customers who are not under NDA, a larger pool. So my colleague Rochelle Blanchard has been doing some really good webcasts that you can see up on the tech community site, and also some blog posts that we're doing to reach out to our larger customer base. So all of this is coming from this customer connection team.
Cool. I mean, obviously, you head up the Endpoint Manager MVP program. Is that right by saying that? Yeah, and also, but also the Windows one as well. So you've got two. Yeah.
Right, and so, the MVPs is really a big chunk of my job. I love the MVPs. I've been managing them for several years now. I'd have to look to see how long it's been, but I think I'm one of the longer termed MVP leads at Microsoft, and, so I do that, and then out of that grew an initiative that we call Women IT Pros, because I realized that maybe there was actually something I could do to try to get more women into tech, and not only into tech, but also into leadership roles. And if they're in leadership roles, that could possibly make them eligible to be MVPs. But the initial goodness is just saying we need more women, and we need to acknowledge the women who are doing the work.
Totally. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I've seen that initiative. So that is that initiative part of Microsoft? Is that an independent thing that you've set up?
It is an independent initiative. It is not a Microsoft official statement or uh, movement in that way, but I do get support from my management. So if I'm spending time on it, they don't consider that to be something that I have to do 100% on my own time. If I need to, run the call during the middle of the day, they're totally fine with that and encourage it and really support me doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great little initiative from what I've seen. So when you've been running that probably just coming up to 2 years, would that be right, or year and
We
a
just
bit?
celebrated our third birthday. It was May of
Third. Oh wow.
2018. Because we had the MVP summit in March of 2018, and I had a new manager based on a reorg, and so he came to the MVP summit and he looked around and he said, "This is awesome. Love what you're doing with the MVPs. Where are your women?" And I said, "I have two. This is twice as many as I had last year." And I thought that was pretty good. But, it just hit me. I've worked in tech for so long, Paul, and, I stopped seeing it. I stopped thinking about it as a problem. I was just thinking of it as, well, this is just the way it is. And I was thinking about it as a supply problem of, I can't have more women MVPs unless there are more women doing this. But then I started realizing, wait, yeah, maybe there is something I could actually do about that. And it
Yeah.
started by, I figured, could I find a group that was already doing something for women IT pros? And as I looked around, I found lots of things that are women in tech, which is great, love that. But what does it mean to say women in tech right now? I mean, if you think about it, you think about how tech is such an important part of everyday business life. If you have a woman who is just there, cranking on a bunch of Power BI stuff to turn out better business intelligence for her group, is she a woman in tech? Even if that's not her primary job? I'd think so. And you start thinking about, all the I met a woman at one of our MVP or at our Women IT Pros meetups in AltSpace, and she takes care of the servers in a coal mine in Canada. Is she a woman in tech? Yeah, I think so. So I think, we need kind of a broad acceptance of what it means. But I think it's at a certain point, it becomes so broad that, you know, uh, that, you try to get these women together. And I don't think there's strong affinity to say, yeah, you're like me, you're doing what I do because we're doing so many different things. We have women, there are so many women in tech groups that we can't really find each other. And there are a ton of groups out there that are doing women who code, which is also great. And we definitely need that. But what I wasn't finding was anything for people like me who I don't code. I learned all of my technology through various training companies. I got my Novell certification and my Cisco CCNA certification and my Microsoft certifications. And so I'm that kind of technical. And I think sometimes when we say that someone is technical or not, a lot of times it becomes code for, do you code? And if you don't code for some reason, you're not considered technical.
Yeah, there's a lot of initiatives around. I mean, I've done a lot of voluntary stuff in the Raspberry Pi community, which is obviously big on coding and bedroom coding and things like that, getting people back into that sort of thing. There's also a big push there to get a lot of women involved in that area, but that can be intimidating. It could be intimidating for anyone, regardless of gender, I think, if coding's not their thing. So as you say, you kind of started off as a trainer, is that right, Kathy?
Um, yeah, I really started off doing computer support. So I graduated college and I had a theater arts degree and wasn't sure what to do with it. So I ended up going into environmental politics. And so I did door-to-door canvassing for a while. And then I did some campaign management for a big initiative in California. And then I ended up as the office manager. And so I had this PC, and this was the first time I'd had a PC, and I had to do the payroll on Lotus 123 for DOS, and it was probably version like 1.1. But I was good at figuring it out. I just adapted to it really well and ended up teaching myself DOS because I just knew like the CD command and the dir command. And so I would do dir and then I would just say, well, what happens if I type this? Oh, everything crashed. What happens if I type this? Oh, something runs. And so I learned to figure out, oh, this is an executable and this is a DLL or this. And so I always had an aptitude for tech.
So it kind of meant something to you. It wasn't confusing. You could work it out. Yeah.
And I wasn't afraid to fail. I wasn't afraid to blow up the computer because it's like, oh, well, I just reboot it and then everything's fine. So there's not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, because I went to university and I did a bit of coding there, so I did Pascal
Mhm.
coding, so I'd done BBC Basic back in the 80s, and I had a computer at home, an Acorn Electron that I used to do a bit on. I could get so far, and then it became very difficult for me. And the Pascal, wow, I struggled on it, and but then Windows happened around that time, or I was exposed to Windows around that time, and this I could understand it, and it didn't intimidate me. Yeah, it meant it just fitted my brain as such. So that's how I kind of see you there. You've kind of gone, okay, like as you just mentioned about the coding. That could be intimidating for people, or it could, throw them and say, "I don't want to." You don't have to do that. So that worked for you, yeah.
Yeah, and, they had macros in 1, 2, 3, but it was just keystrokes, but it fit my brain. I could understand, I did some very complicated macros with that. So I got to where it used to take me about, 4 hours to figure out all of the benefits, and I figured out how to make a macro that would do it in under 5 minutes with a lot more accuracy. And to me, that's always been the beauty of computing, is if you have to do something repeatable and predictable, you invest the time up front.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense, and that's the power of automation, isn't it? It's just to get rid of those kind of repetitive tasks, get them done. Macros. I bet those macros are probably still in use somewhere, Kathy. You never you never know.
Well, yeah, because, I went to, after I moved back up to the Bay Area where I was born, I ended up doing some temp work, and they could send me on any temp assignment because I could figure out any weird program that was out there because I had that affinity for the tech. And one of the things they sent me out to was, a soda bottling company, and they just had this ancient, I mean, even for that time, it was a pretty ancient computer, it was very slow, and they said it was going to be some Lotus 123 and some, 10 key, calculator, but then they stuck me off in a conference room with the calculator and a stack of papers, and I was manually adding up a bunch of numbers. I would walk the sheet into the guy in the next room, and he was putting that in Lotus 123, and I said, "Wait a minute, why are you doing this? Lotus should just add these up for you." And they said, "Well, we don't know how to do that. Somebody built this spreadsheet for us, and then we're just plugging in these totals." And I said, "Well, I'm not gonna come back for this 10 key job because, that's the great thing about temp work. You say, I don't wanna come back. Um, but if you want me to build you some spreadsheets, I'll build you some spreadsheets." And so the next day they called me back. My agency said, "Yeah, they want you to come back and they'll pay you more money and they want you to build the spreadsheets." So who knows? They could still be in use. That was a very long time ago. So I don't know about that.
The reason I mention that is I used to do some work at a local council, and they had this macro based system. It was oh gosh, it was written on Excel 2, I think, and I can't remember the version now. Access 2, maybe. It was about 20 years old, but it was quite key. Quite important system for some people getting paid, and the chap who wrote it was still there, and he had to dip in every now and again and just go and tweak it all, and we had to eventually move that to find some way of making that work when we moved to Windows 7.
Mm,
It just reminded me of that scenario of this
mhm,
code that, you write these macros and they could 20 odd years later still be, chugging away somewhere, serving a purpose. You never know.
mhm.
Because, comparing that to config manager, there's, 25-year code probably in that.
Mhm.
system, isn't it? Stuff from back in the day from SMS one days. If it works,
Yeah.
why fix it? Yeah, if it's not broken.
Although I used to teach the old 1.2, and I think a lot of things did change with 2.0. There were some major bits there.
I never ever, unfortunately, never got to tinker with SMS. So Config Manager 2007 was my first exposure. So I missed out
Ah,
on that. Yeah, yeah. I've heard some great stories about the SMS days, and there's a lot of people that occasionally, they're tweeting their CD-ROMs from, this is my original install media, and that they get nostalgic.
yeah.
But I read something on your LinkedIn. So I had a quick look at your LinkedIn
Mhm.
before coming on to get a little bit of history on you. And there was a quote there. So I was interested to see, tech and yourself from an early age. And I saw this thing about your parents asking you to go into the school to program the VCR. Or
Oh, they called me when I was at college because they wanted the VCR programmed and they couldn't figure out how to do it.
oh yeah. I feel like that with my kids now. There when they're on the phones and they're tapping away and they say, "Look at this," and I'm going, "How did you do that?"
Well, my daughter says that it's actually kind of the reverse, for her because, she'll be talking with her classmates and they're bemoaning how technically unsavvy their parents are, and she says, "Oh, no, my parents have it all over me."
Yeah. So your interest in tech then, did that start quite early on?
It did. We had, what was it, Sinclair, the
Oh, like
Timex
a
Sinclair,
ZX80, 81, yeah.
yeah, it was
Spectrum.
very old, and, it was just fascinating to me to be able to write these kind of programs with it, even though, there wasn't much I was able to figure out how to do with it. And then, my senior year of high school, we finally got a computer class, and I was just fascinated with these things, and I loved what I could make it do, and I loved putting in the time. We were doing, Logo and QBasic, and I would get really excited about something and take the assignment and then figure out how to do different stuff with it. And my lab partner and I would go up to the instructor and say, "Oh, look, see, we made it do this and we made it do this." And he would say, "Oh, I don't think you can do that." And I said, "No, look, we already did this. See." But he wasn't the real computer teacher. He was the guy who covered for the other guy on his prep period. So I think we were actually outpacing him, and he was a little nervous with that. And, it just occurs to me, Paul, no one ever said to me, "Well, Kathy, you could do this in college." It just no one ever, I just never thought of me as being somebody who could go do that stuff.
Were you ever being encouraged to do other things though? Or, "Oh, maybe you should give this a go," or anything like that?
Well, I was always a very good writer. English always came very easy to me, and I always struggled with math. I'm unfortunately one of those stereotypical, "Oh, math is hard." And it wasn't that I couldn't do it. It just I had to work more at it. And, when the writing came so easy, it was hard to and, I had a couple really good math teachers who made me see the beauty of it, and a few who just really turned me off from it. But one thing I realized, I didn't realize this until just a couple years ago. I would think, "Oh, I'm bad at math," but no, I actually got a math award in ninth grade because of geometry. I rocked geometry. That is where my math skills lie. And, the first half of the year when it was all the proofs, I had perfect work the entire first part. And that's why I actually split the award that year. They gave it to me and someone else because when we hit the second half of the year and we got into the trig and the numbers, that's where I struggle.
Yeah, oh gosh, trig, yeah. That's not one I'm any good at all. I think for me, I got so far with maths. I think kind of a bit like coding. I got to a certain level and I just couldn't then get beyond it to expert level or anything like that. I could just get by. And for someone who uses computers, maths is all part and parcel of it, isn't it? Really. So you kind of go, interesting how I can't get beyond that. But I don't know. When I went to university, they put us on a maths module. Um, that was just completely alien to me. I just could not grasp it whatsoever. But it's the way it goes, really, isn't it? We're all suited to certain things. So you had this ability to compute in to tech, but was it? So you say no one ever said it. So no one probably really spotted it, I suppose.
Well, and, technology was really just coming into play then. But I think we just have this idea that that the math has to be locked with the computing, and I don't know that that's true anymore. Maybe it was back in the day. Yeah, if you're going to be there manipulating source code and binary, okay, there's certain numerical stuff, and for some of the things that people want to do, yes, math becomes a very important part of it. But I think we've gotten computers and coding to a place where, well, you look at the fabulous work that Microsoft is doing with the low code, no code initiatives with the Power Platform. And the whole point there is if you're just good at the logic, you should be able to go and just here, plug this piece in and plug this piece in and go and grab this variable and plop it here. You shouldn't have to be able to take, calculus to do that,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Logic's key, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's that process. So I remember back in my computer studies day, we had to draw out a flow chart on making a cup of tea. Very British way of doing it. An IT
Yes.
flow chart. Yeah, cup of tea. How do we do it? Now I don't drink tea, which is could be a shock coming from the UK.
No, I know not everyone does.
Well, I didn't know how to make a cup of tea. So my flowchart, they were saying, do you not? Now this is the thing. I'm from the north of England, so we say mash the tea, which is actually brew the tea. Um, so do you brew the tea? And my response to the teacher was, I don't make it. I don't drink it. So my flowchart was all wrong. But it's about the process, isn't it? So
Mhm.
boil the kettle, do the tea bag, etc. I still won't be able to do the process because um, I don't make it. So yeah, yeah, logic's quite key in the whole process, really, and I think that's where for me, I can just get by. So if I'm doing PowerShell or something like that, I can go through that flow, create what I need to do. And that's where it kind of makes sense. But like you say, you don't need to be an expert in calculus to really to get by.
Yeah, I would like to see a bachelor in arts in computing and take all of the pieces of, creating code that don't need the mathematical degree and create a degree in that. And I think that might be something that might appeal to more women like me who are out there. I don't think I'm unique in that.
Yeah, because computer science straight away can put people off, can't it?
Mhm,
Science. If you're not a science person, it's not going to appeal to you. And so by taking out that element, definitely, definitely. So going back to the women in IT.
mhm.
So that's been, from what I can see, is doing really well from the things that you're tweeting out. So how often are you doing those? And what is it all? Is a virtual format that you're spreading out across the world?
Well, it's a couple of different prongs to the initiative. So the first thing that I see is, yes, it needs to be virtual because I was talking with Amy Aradmark, who is one of our female MEM MVPs, and said, is there any kind of user group? Is there anything like this that already exists? And she said, no. And they thought about maybe starting one. But of course, one of the things you run into is, it can be harder for women to get away than men. Not always, but, with families and everything and, even getting to conferences can be difficult. So making it virtual was a no-brainer there because it just, removes a huge barrier. And, I asked for a couple different starting times, and it seemed like noon on Fridays, Pacific time was about 3 o'clock Eastern time, and that seemed to be kind of a good sweet spot for people here. But of course, it didn't work well for everyone else in the world. So I had people saying, "Well, could you do another one?" It's like, "Hey, if you want to start one, here's how you do it." And so Sonia Cuff and Jess Dotson, who also happened to work for Microsoft, we were talking about it at Ignite, and I think it was 2018, and talking about starting it. And so then Sonia came back maybe a year later and said that, yeah, she and Jess wanted to start the Asia Pacific version of it. So that's been running for a while. And then somebody else who was on a related team to mine in endpoint management said that she wanted to start one in European time. So Tanya Lima Pereira is doing that one, and then gosh, Carolyn, I'm blanking on her last name. They're just running the EU series. So I would love to see that. I would love to see someone who wants to start one in China or Japan or India, and all it takes is somebody, and they don't have to work for Microsoft, just somebody who says, "Yeah, I want a regional thing." But then the other thing that I want to do is I want to try to find the technical specifications. Because, like I was saying with women in tech, it's too broad. You're not going to find your tribe there. So, if you are a woman in exchange, is there a group out there for you? I don't know. I know there is WIT Pass for women in SQL. I know there is women in SharePoint. And I learned a lot from the women in SharePoint about how they've organized the women in their technology space. I've seen a lot of groups for women in various types of information security. But a lot of these other areas, not so much. And I would love to have communities of practice for women. Like if you were a woman technical writer, okay, maybe you're not all going to write about the same technology, but you could bond with each other over writing about tech. Or if you're a woman in technical marketing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So, I mean, the what I find is that when we do the events, we don't get a lot of females coming to the events, and you know, there are there are people doing it, but it's disappointing on the numbers. So, do you think for the physical events, do you
Mhm.
think there's some intimidation there for women to go along? Because from what I've seen from your virtual meetups, that's open to anyone. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and so I think there are a couple things going on with the physical events. And so another prong of Women IT Pros is to say if there is a physical event happening, and of course, for now it's all virtual, but when we get physical events again, so like at the Midwest Management Summit, I went there and I said, hey, let's get the women together on the first day because this is something I learned from the women in SharePoint. They would do a group picture on the first day. It doesn't cost anything, but you get the women who are there to get together, and it makes those women form bonds. Even if it's just a temporary, like during the week. Okay, now I have someone to sit with. I have someone to go to the social events with, and that can be a lot more welcoming. And then you're more likely to want to come back next year because, oh, you met Cheryl at that thing, and Cheryl's coming back. Okay, I want to go back because I want to be able to hang out with Cheryl again, right? So some of it is bonding. I think there are other things that come into play though, because for one thing, usually going to a big conference is going to be expensive, which means a woman has to go to her boss and has to ask for the conference admission, the travel, and the lodging. Now, she may or may not have to also deal with the family, managing the household for that. There's a lot of situations that can come into play there. But just going to the boss to say, I want this money, it's worth it to send me. It can be a really tough proposition in some organizations. We know that women are still often looked on as second class citizens in IT. And it can be very difficult then to want to, put yourself out there for this kind of rejection to ask for something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I find it disappointing that that we don't get more women coming to the events. And also, when we do host the events, we notice that we might have a woman or a couple of women here, but we shouldn't be thinking in those terms, really, should we? It shouldn't be something that. I mean, it's great that we see that, and we have women come to the events, but it's like it shouldn't be noticed. It should be natural that more people are coming along, and it shouldn't even be spotted. Do you know what I mean? It becomes obvious that there's someone sat there and sort of thing, and it's disappointing that there aren't more, and it's really hard to find ways to promote that as someone who helps with a user group to encourage more people to come along. I mean, obviously, your initiative is ideal, isn't it? Because it's stated straight away that this is a forum for women to get involved. I mean, how would you see a user group trying to promote more females to come along?
I think a lot of it is just one-to-one outreach. And, even with this, global Women IT Pros thing, I think a lot of it still comes down to inviting people to make sure they know that they are welcome and appreciated. Not in spite of being a woman, but, because, yeah, the idea is that the diversity is what makes us better and stronger. So I think just reaching out to women to say, hey, are you going to be able to come and encourage them? because, a lot of times, and this is true for guys, it's like you're busy, you have 25 million things to do, and, trying to grab the time out of your day to go to that, whether or not you have extra family duties on top of that is always gonna be difficult, and then you add some of these family duties and, like, who's gonna make dinner or who's gonna pick the kid up from school. Ideally, in my household, my husband was very much an equal partner, he was a stay-at-home dad for several years, so, I didn't have those kind of pressures. But, but still, even for the family, even if, my husband's out, it means that I'm doing more. If I'm out, it means he has to do more. There's still a balance that you have to achieve with things like this.
Yeah.
So having someone just say, "Hey, we want you here. You are welcome here," can go a really long way because unfortunately, there are guys who go out of their way to make it clear that women are not welcome and that they aren't wanted. And so how do you counteract that?
That's just disappointing, isn't it? That kind of thing. Do you know what? I'd be really interested to see how the virtual events have changed the ratio, and gathering stats from those sort of things to see if we're seeing more females attending those kind of virtual events, in comparison, and whether
Mhm.
attending something physical becomes more intimidating because there's 80, 90 chaps in the room or whatever. That would be interesting, and to get some kind of feedback from somewhere. Um, I know there's been a lot of really good events recently, and to try and tap into those kind of stats to see, is it easy to just hop on a Teams call, and take part in that as a spectator to listen to the sessions than it is to physically go to that event.
Oh, I went to the Cisco Live conference last month, and, I noticed they were doing some, gamification for people who were posting the most, and I noticed that, in several of the categories, that several of the top posters were women there, so there were definitely women who were very engaged in that Cisco conference. So, I don't know. I don't know that we take stats on things like that, but I am definitely anticipating that at Ignite that we will do some kind of women IT pros thing. I don't know what it will be yet until they've, announced more details about what Ignite is actually going to be. But, just another thing that I wanted to say before I forget is, if you're going to do an event, feel free to hashtag it, hashtag women IT pros, all one word, right? And invite women, even on Twitter, especially if it's gonna be a virtual event. Say, "Hey, women are welcome here. We want you." And see if that helps, even if it's just one additional woman who might not have come except for this special invitation, and make her feel welcome. Don't not singled out, but, let her know that she is there and that you're happy to have her there.
Yeah, as I say, when we have when we look into the audience and we see women attending, we always talk about it. It's great. We had a female in the audience today, and it gets noticed, and as you say, it's trying to encourage that more, for sure, and to get more involvement, and it's even when you walk in from customer to customer. The way that I work, I'm working independently to go onto different customer sites, and again, it's still disappointing to see a lack there. So this is going to take a long time to shift, isn't it? It's going to take um, quite a while, and maybe the generations that are starting to come through that the numbers are being picked up. But one thing I do notice when I was over at the summit is there is a real mix, of people in the product group, which is encouraging to see. And I know that's something that's totally encouraged, isn't it? Diversity and different sexuality and all this is encouraged at Microsoft, and you see that with the presenters that come up on stage. Um, and as you say, it's a shame when you look out into the audience of us MVPs, and like you said, you had a couple just recently kind of coming on board, sort of thing, and to try and grow those numbers really,
Mhm.
because there are a lot of experts out there that deserve that kind of attention and things.
Well, I talked to a woman in the UK who's worked with SMS for 20 years, and I said, "Why aren't you tweeting and blogging and posting about this stuff?" And I think she kinda went, "Yeah, why aren't I?" And, some of it comes down to time because, to be MVP status, it's not good enough just to have a blog here and there. You have to have, really consistent activity. So you're doing the equivalent of at least a part-time job if you're doing it right. And some people, it's pretty much an additional full-time job they're doing. So my hat is really off to you and all of your peers in the program for doing that amazing amount of work.
We've chatted about this on a couple of the podcasts where we talk about, that there's the amount of time asking that question, how much time do you spend on it? And you can't quantify it because it's just, sometimes it may not be too much on a week, the next week you're ramped up. But things like, not everything that you do comes out into the world anyway. There's a lot of things that we work on behind the scenes, and that might just be building something or testing something, and all this that just never gets
Hmm.
um, broadcast as such to the wider audience. And like you say, it can become part-time, full-time, second job almost. And then you have a life beyond that as well, which you
Hmm.
have to kind of deal with as well. So yeah, things can get busy at times, for
Yeah.
sure. So Kathy, how long have you been with Microsoft then?
I started April 15th of 2002.
Okay, and how did that come about?
So I had been doing, various, tech work, temp work kind of things. I was like the sole desktop support person at one company, and I actually worked at 3Com for a while and did, a lot of different things in their IT department. And then I started training. And at first, I was doing apps training like Excel and Lotus. And then I started training the Microsoft networking curriculum. And so that was how I got to know some people at Microsoft because we had the old NNTP news groups. I don't know if you ever used those old NNTP news groups, but oh, yeah. So as the Microsoft certified trainers, we really relied on those. And that was where you could go to talk to other trainers about the course. And hey, in this lab, are you having a problem at this? And somebody say, oh, yeah, this is what you do to get around that. And so it was my first experience of virtual community, and it was fantastic. And I'm still in touch with many of those MCTs from back in the day. And also through that, I became acquainted with Wally Mead, who is, of course, legendary in the SMS and config manager world. And Wally was very good about being in the trainer forum and answering questions about the course that he wrote, the SMS 2.0 courses that were there. And I got to attend the Tech Week that was in Seattle. I was living in California at the time, but he taught for the whole week there. And again, I'm still in touch with some of those people from way back when. And I started to keep a frequently asked questions about the course that the trainers would ask so that Wally didn't have to keep answering the same question over and over and over again. Cause who wants to do that? Right. It's like, okay, read the fact, number 6, number 12. And so I think that helped. And so when it came time to do what was going to be the SMS 2002 course, because that's what it was originally scheduled as, um, they asked Wally for the MCTs that might be good subject matter experts, and my name was on the list. So I directly have Wally Mead to thank for that. They reached out to me, and I had been training for a training company in California, but I just had my daughter, and I stayed home for 6 months, and then I went back to work. My husband was the stay at home dad, and I was training, but that was during the .com bust, and it was getting more and more difficult for me because I couldn't really travel since I was nursing my daughter. So when Microsoft came around and said, "Hey, we would like you to be the subject matter expert on this course that you're pretty expert in, or this topic," I said, "Yes, that would be great." And so I started with just a leave of absence from the training company, saying, "Hey, I'm going to be working in the training group. I can, keep good visibility there." But then the product was slipping, which eventually became SMS 2003, and they said, "We can't keep the contract in place, but we'd like to interview you for a full time job." So they interviewed me, but it was with the understanding that I wasn't going to actually be working on the SMS course since that was taking longer. That I was going to work on security courseware, and I said, "I know nothing about security," and they said, "That's okay, we'll teach you." So I had Ben Smith and Brian Komar as my security mentors starting off there, and I learned a whole bunch.
I love how they just say, "Don't worry, we'll teach you that. That's not a problem." Great. So did that require you to relocate then?
Yes, it did.
Okay, and so you just had your daughter. How old would she have been around the time then that that all kind of kicked in for relocation?
She had just turned 1 when I came up on the contract, and so, we actually did kind of a temporary relocation just as a contractor, and I was paying for this, we moved into an apartment up here in Redmond for a month, because my husband was a stay-at-home dad, he didn't have to worry about, you know, leaving his job behind, and then, let's see, I guess it was in May of 2002 that we actually moved here and we got the full relocation assistance, and,
So that was kind of prior to her starting at school.
well, yeah, even preschool, she was just a babe, so, yeah, my husband
So
did
it's
the,
perfect time to make the move. Yeah.
yeah, my husband tried to find the mommies groups, but unfortunately, a lot of the mommies groups, women can be just as chauvinistic about the mommy stuff as men can be about working in the office place, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah. So did he try and find a few, but couldn't really settle in
Mhm.
into one that, yeah. Okay. So you made the move. So that kind of, because there were no ties as such for your daughter and for your husband, that
Mhm.
worked well for you then, making
Yep,
that move, because it's quite a change. So was California where you were brought up?
yep. California girl, San Jose, born and raised, and, then I went to UCLA for college.
Right, right. Okay. So was it easy to make that move to Seattle or Redmond? Or was it? And what would you phrase it as? Would you phrase it as Redmond? You wouldn't call it Seattle.
Yeah, technically it's Redmond, but since not everyone knows where Redmond is, and actually it ended up being a really good thing because my brother had 3 kids when he realized years before that he wasn't going to be able to afford a house in Silicon Valley, and he did or he does MRI technology, and so he
Mm.
was able to get a spot in an MRI facility up in Seattle. And moved his family up there years before. So when we were up here for the month, a lot of what my husband was doing was going hanging out with my sister-in-law and her kids. And we realized, hey, if we have to do this, this isn't going to be a bad thing because we have family here. And then we also had some friends. There were another couple of kids, or there's a couple who had a kid almost the same age as Rowan. I got pregnant, they got pregnant. We had Rowan, they had Cammy, and they had been the company that he worked for had been acquired by Microsoft, so they were already living up here.
Okay. So not too daunting a move then, because you've got ties there already. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So my husband would get together with Cammy's mom, and they would go out, and people say, "Oh, cute kids. Are they twins?" And no, they're 3 months apart because they would assume that my husband was married to Cammy's mom.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. And so were you able to kind of, help each other out when it came to kind of nannying duties and things like that at
Yeah,
an early
yeah,
age?
yeah, yeah. We would go on vacation together and take a nanny for both of them, and we would share babysitting, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, not a luxury I had, unfortunately. So I'm from the north of England, a couple of 100 miles away, and we moved to London. And my wife's parents are from up the north as well, but they moved back to Ireland, and so we were very isolated
Uh,
in those kind of duties. We just had to get on with it, yeah. And with four kids,
ooh,
that can be a juggle at
yeah.
times, and yeah, I think we're still waiting to go out, like we used to do back in the day. That will happen one day. So good. That's good. That's not too daunting a move. And from my personal experience of Seattle and that, I absolutely love going over, and gutted that we weren't able to make it this year for obvious reasons. Um, and also, I must say thank you for actually stating on an email that, yeah, because I was still wavering about whether to come over in March as well, because I had the tickets, and you kind of spelt it out in an email to everyone saying, well, if you come over, you may not get back, and blah blah blah. So there was yourself and Bill Burnett, who used to work at Adaptiva, who
Mhm.
kind of gave the true picture of how COVID was affecting particularly the Kirkland area, but Seattle at the time. So just got to say thanks, because I was almost tempted to fly over. But yeah, it's a lovely area, isn't it? I mean,
Mhm.
I've chilled out in Bellevue, as you can imagine, and it just seems a nice area to kind of settle down.
It is. Yeah, I definitely love it here. I miss my friends in California, and I miss a few restaurants like In-N-Out Burger, but, other than that, I think the quality of life is nicer here.
Yeah, so you've been there about almost 20 years then, yeah.
It was 18, I guess. Yeah, 2002.
Yeah, yeah. Time flies, does it? Is it? You've been there with
Yes, it
Microsoft
does.
for a while. Does it seem like that? Yeah. No, I know. Because my oldest he's 20 tomorrow. So yeah,
Wow.
that's flying.
Yeah, mine will be 20 in
Unbelievable.
September. So, yeah, we're about the same.
Oh, so they're not millennials.
Yep,
Yeah, that's
yep.
right,
She
isn't
was
it?
born in September 2000, and I stopped at
I
1. I
do
just
like how my for my eldest. Yeah, you probably did the right thing there. No, I like the fact that I can work his age out quite easily. When you've got four, it gets tricky to remember dates of births and years and things like that. But because it's exactly on the zeros, I can work it out mathematically very easily. So that's cool. So you kind of kickstarted on that, and it just over time progressed through. Um,
Mhm.
so your current role then, as such, when would that have started? Was that quite a few years ago? I can't remember if you said earlier.
Well, it's interesting. So, I was on the training certification team for a while, and then there was an opening on what was then the SMS doc team, and that was what I'd really wanted to do. But the advice I got was get in. Even if you're not going to work on SMS, they're going to put you on security. Get in, get your foot in the door, get into Microsoft, and then you can always change. And so that ended up being good advice because then I saw the opening, and so I reached out to Steve Kazmarek, who used to be very big in the field, wrote several books, and he was the on the doc team at the time. Said, "Hey, is this on your team? Could I be working with you?" And he said yes. And so I think they were very excited to have me in there. And I loved being on the team. And I loved working on the config man documentation, for all of 2007. But I just got really burnt out. I needed a change, so I jumped over to hardware for a few years, which was a totally different thing. And then
Hardware. So what would that involve then?
mice and keyboards. So you know how you open the box and you take out that little piece of paper that shows you how to set it up and you don't look at it, you just throw it away? That was mine.
Yeah, you wrote that. Yeah. Oh, sorry. All that effort you're putting in. We should have looked at it really, shouldn't we? Someone's behind all that, writing that.
Well, yeah, and I luckily I didn't have to draw it because my drawing would be horrible. But we had an artist, but I would work out. Okay, we're going to have let's do this, and this many steps, and so she would do the look of it, and we would get it translated. And I also owned the out of box experience. So I didn't own the box. I didn't own the marketing content on the box, but I owned what the experience was when you opened it. So I was literally sitting in people's living rooms watching them unbox prototypes of, like that flat mouse that bends, the Arc Touch
Oh
mouse.
yes.
Yeah, and seeing how people interacted, it was an amazing job. And then making sure that we had good directions, but also so you didn't really need the directions. Ideally, if you have a good out of box experience, people shouldn't have to sit there and read a whole bunch. And configuration manager is kind of the opposite. You really do have to know. When I was working on the docs, one of the things that we loved is we knew people actually read the docs because you kind of needed it to figure everything out, or you had to have some kind of training.
One thing I'm noticing though, as I'm getting older, is when I do take something out of the box, I'm starting to read the rules a bit more. I think that's old age kicking in. Oh, pass me the documentation. I must, because otherwise sometimes it doesn't work. So now, have you seen how? Have you looked and read how to set that up? So I'm starting to do that as I get older. I don't know if that's maybe an old age thing. Anyway.
So then I wanted to move into program management because I was considered a user experience designer then, but I knew program management was going to be a better long term path for me. And when I interviewed for a job over in the Windows Embedded team, they said, "Well, what would your dream job be?" And I said, "Well, there's this guy, Wally Mead, and he has this great job where he manages these MVPs and he does all of this community kind of stuff. And I would like to do that." And so then what I was working on in Windows Embedded was actually an add on to Configuration Manager to manage embedded devices. And when they decided to move that from the embedded group into the Configuration Manager team, I felt like I went home again. I was like Dorothy clicking my heels, and I was back, and I was so happy to be back in that team. And then Wally was there, and so I got to be Wally's coworker for several years. And then when he left Microsoft, there was the question of, well, who's going to do the MVPs? And at first they came to me and said, "Hey, could you just babysit this until we figure out somebody to run it?" And I said, "No, I want to run it. Give it to me." And they were like, "Okay, great, here you go." And
Yeah.
you know,
So they weren't going to go. Hold on a minute. You've got to apply for this, and we're going to do X amount of candidates straight away. It's just like, okay, you keyed on it, go for it.
Yeah, yeah. So, but what was a little bit weird was, I was a feature PM, so I was still actually, shipping stuff. I used to work on the Windows Phone company portal. I love my Windows Phone. And we had a company portal for it. So that was my thing. But then, when they transitioned that work to our office in Cambridge, Massachusetts, um, they said, "Well, hey, go look at this user voice thing." And so I ended up doing a lot more customer related stuff, but I was still being evaluated as a feature PM. Well, in the meantime, they had spun up this team that is a customer experience engineering team, which is all about helping customers effectively use the product. And we all kind of said, yeah, the stuff that I'm doing would actually fit better in customer experience rather than in the future PM work.
So you've been involved in this role for quite a while now. I mean, I'm totally impressed with when I kind of see the volume of emails that fly around, I go, wow, you're busy. I can see that, and I get impressed by the interaction that you have with people, because I can imagine it becomes almost like a little bit of a man management role as well, even with us MVPs.
Man management or like a human manager? Or?
I mean, you don't have to. You don't hear us say, "Oh, well, here's I need to have 3 days off" or anything like that. But you kind of because you get a bit of a personal relationship in a way at times with people. Because you know them over the years. So management to me would be people would come to you and tell you something because of a particular thing, and then it's you understanding that person. Or I don't know. Am I just talking nonsense there? I don't know.
Well, so there are a couple different aspects to it because so we have the regional MVP leads, the community program managers or CPMs. So I believe yours is Claire in the UK,
Claire,
and
yeah,
she's
yeah,
up
yeah.
on the. If you go to the mvp.microsoft.com website, it says meet the team. You can actually see who the regional people are, and it says what regions they manage. So in a lot of ways, those are really more like directly the managers of the MVPs. Because in terms of the program pieces, so they handle all of the administrivia, the bits and business, and then what I'm really doing is just trying to make sure I see myself as the liaison between my engineers who want to make really good products, and to do that, they need to talk to customers. And then I got these MVPs who have technical questions and want to help the larger community do stuff. So if I can get the engineers and the MVPs talking together, the engineers are going to make better products. The MVPs are going to have a better understanding about the products and are going to be able to help people use them better.
Sure. So I'm completely wrong in what I was
Well,
assuming, but yeah,
I wouldn't say completely right because people do talk to me. As you said, you'd reached out when you had some issues going on because it does help to have some context. And in that case, it really helps to have both the product group lead and the regional CPM lead understand what's going on so that we can factor things in. Because obviously, there are challenges in life, and we don't want to just kick somebody off the island, if they have a blip. We want to be understanding about situations. And at the same time, we have to balance that with, well, if there are other people who are still doing work, maybe it's time to take a break and then come back, when life is going to be, more amenable to heavy duties.
totally. Yeah, no, totally. Now, so therefore, so now my thing is understanding, not understanding, that's the wrong word, but getting a feel for how much of an effort the MVP summit is, and of an effort, how much of an impact that is for you, in your role. So obviously this year it was very different. So we had the
Hmm.
virtual summit. But I can imagine that's a huge, huge undertaking to coordinate that, to manage that. And this is where I'm saying about your role being very, very busy. You make it look so easy in that it just seems effortless because it's never hardly ever gone wrong. And the sudden flip to a virtual summit this year again seemed flawless. Now, how much time does that really take up? Because it just seems like a gigantic task. Now, bear in mind that I am absolutely useless at organizing things. So, this is where I would go, wow, that would just baffle me to do it.
Well, organizing is one of my superpowers, so, and being a program manager, that's a piece of it, and thank you for saying it looks effortless. But then again, you were not at my first summit, right? So my first summit, it was obviously, much more difficult, and following Wally Mead was a very tough act to follow, I have to say. And I there were definitely some things I would go back and do differently. But over the years, and I think this became true for Wally as well. You kind of get your template. You kind of know, okay, we're going to have a session on this. We're going to plug these things in. It's going to be a basic approach. And one of the things that has changed is me taking over the Windows and devices for IT MVPs, and so trying to figure out what degree of integration is going to be the best. So the first year that I had them, we actually fully integrated most things. We just had one day of separate content. With going to all virtual, we just integrated everything. And so, I'm still trying to figure that piece out. So there are always new challenges, but there are pieces of it that are fairly well known. And I'm also just really blessed to have a team that really appreciates and values the MVPs. Uh, David James, as the director of engineering, has just been an amazing person to work with, because I remember, I think it was the second year that I had the summit, and we were going back and forth of, well, do we just do the official 3 days or do we extend it to the full week? And I know most of the MVPs travel so long, they would much rather do the full week. And he said, yeah, we'll figure out something. I don't know, maybe we'll do a hackathon. And really, I mean, that's how he works. That was how the hackathon was born. But, he really pulled together something that I think was astonishing and enriching and valuable for everybody. And after one of the other summits, we had kind of an unofficial summit where we brought people in and actually had them, very deeply embedded with the product team. And Sangeeta, one of the managers, came to me and she said, this is great because I have engineers who are fresh out of college who just don't understand what this product is doing for people. It's a complicated product for anybody to understand, but you're out of school, you're trying to, build this thing. And for them to sit there and work side by side with MVPs for a week on it, they get a much deeper sense about what they're doing matters to people and why it's important to get the little things right.
Again, going back to daunting things, again, the interns in to get involved in these sort of things, that for them, they've got to get as you say, it's a beast of a product, and takes takes a while to get used to, to throw them in like that. But they see, the one that was done recently was the task sequence search. I remember a lot of conversations around that, and the end result's brilliant. It's something that has made my life easier. I was using it today. Um,
Mhm.
and but for them to get thrown in there, it's that interaction, isn't it? What is it
Mhm.
you're trying to achieve? Try and get all the answers, as much as you can to piece it together. Um, but yeah, it's a privileged position to be in, and it's it's something that we talked about this on previous podcasts. Walking into that room at the summit for the first time, and you're like, wow, I can't believe I'm in the room with all these people. It's bizarre.
Yep.
I shouldn't be here, sort of thing. A lot of people go through that process, and I'm sure there's others who say I should be here. It depends on the person. But yeah, so going back to, so when you did the virtual summit, then how easy was that to flip? Because it was kind of you were prepping up to this physical event, and then you had to change. Was it something that was done very quickly?
It was done very quickly. We really just had a very short turnaround, and I think one of the things that was interesting is, the MVP org was really the first organization at Microsoft, running one of what we call our flagship, our tier 1 events, that had to make this change, and with very little time. And my hats are off to our team's team is absolutely amazing. And how they were able to just, turn and crank stuff out and run a really major conference in a very short time. And, it was astounding. So one of the things that is a little bit different though is because, we have these award categories, and so there is an award category for Windows and devices for IT. And so I manage primarily the Windows for IT piece, and then we have someone else who manages them with the Surface devices. But it tends to be just kind of one group, and then a few people also specialize in Surface. Whereas in enterprise mobility, we have the MVPs who specialize in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, And I'm so glad I can say MEM now instead of having to say configuration manager and Intune. It's just so much easier. So we have my MEM MVPs, MEM powered, but then there are also the identity MVPs who are run as a very separate group by a different lead. We have a handful of RDS MVPs run separately, and then there are information protection MVPs. And we don't really like if we were to have a track, we wouldn't just have a track for enterprise mobility. We kind of do our own programming. So it was very easy for me as far as the mem MVPs to just say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. And I set most of the stuff up to be a little bit separate than what the rest of the MVPs were doing. Because once you have teams, you can do just about anything you want, right? If you have teams and you have a way to reach people. And I have teams and I have a way to reach my MVPs in both groups. And so I was able to just kind of do my own thing. And that made it a lot easier for me to be agile, and I'm dealing with, I think at that point I had 53 Windows MVPs and maybe 62 MEM MVPs, very small groups. There are other MVPs, there are hundreds of Office MVPs in the various categories and hundreds of Azure MVPs. And I think even hundreds of identity MVPs. They have a lot more. So, it's just the scale that I'm running at makes it easy for me to be nimble and just kind of say what's going to be best for my product team, what's going to be best for my MVPs. Okay, I'm just going to do it this way.
And as I say, it looks like you're doing this flawlessly. I really, I mean that it looks effortless, and it's not. So yeah, congrats on holding it all together and holding all those quick changes together as well that happen. And then of course you do our monthly catch up calls as well and organising all that. So it's never ending, really, isn't it, for yourself? So my thing would be to kind of go now. How do you relax? What's your thing outside of all this then?
Oh, well, one of the things that I'd really started to get back into, I was very much into different types of folk dancing. So I don't know if you've seen English country dancing. I don't know if you had to do it in school or anything, but
We did that at school, yeah, yeah.
yeah, but, and in America, we did, square dancing, which is, the equivalent, and I always really enjoyed the square dancing, and when I was, just finishing college, I found that, there are actually people who do a lot of things with folk music and folk dance, and I learned to play what's called the Appalachian dulcimer. It's not the hammered one with all the strings, it's just, a couple of strings, and you put it on your lap. And I loved all of this folk stuff, so I got very involved in the folk community, and, there's a kind of dance called contra dance, which has nothing to do with Nicaragua, but it's very much like the English dances, except usually in English dance, all of the gents are on one side and the ladies are on the other side, and that is called proper formation. And in a contra dance, usually you cross every other man and woman over so that you are standing across the set from someone of the opposite sex and on either side with someone of the opposite sex, and that is called improper formation. So that's where the contra comes because you have opposing men and women all the way down the line. Although, of course, in Seattle, a lot of times they don't even call them genders anymore. They will call them larks and robins because we have a lot of people who don't identify with a particular gender, and we have a lot of people who are very good at dancing either part, and why should they be confined to one part? So I was getting very much back into the folk dancing, and of course, that was, one of the things that immediately had to be shut down, and it will be one of the last things to come back because you are touching hands and you are in ballroom swing position with people all up and down the line. So I truly mourn that. And then,
Frustrating,
yeah.
yeah, when you can't do that, yeah.
And then, I actually hadn't been doing as much folk singing. I used to actually play the dulcimer and sing in coffee houses back, my years post-college, and I just really much I'd very much gotten away from that, and, then, unfortunately, we have a friend whose wife passed away in March, not from COVID, from a brain tumor, and I had met him back when I was doing the folk singing 30 years ago, and we'd stayed close all these years, and we would spend New Year's Eve together and go to the Seattle Folklife Festival every year together in May. And so, when his wife passed, it was just as everything was starting to shut down. We were still able to have the funeral, fortunately, but all of the things that he would have done to assuage his grief, like baseball, gone, going out to movies and movie theaters, gone, and folk singing, but one of the blessings is that they started up a lot of these folk circles now have gone to virtual, and so they're happening over webcams, and so the one in Seattle went virtual, so we've started meeting up every Sunday night. We get together and we sing with people in Seattle, and people in Seattle are they're singing with people in England and Ireland. They're going to these pub sing-alongs all over the world.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant. Keep that community going, and because how long is it going to be before we can start all this interaction again? It's really an unknown, isn't it?
Mhm.
Absolute unknown. So we could be in these kind of lockdown scenarios for a while. I mean, I've found that because I was listening to a chap. So I'm into a bit of my music thing is the grunge scene, the Seattle
Ah,
grunge scene. Yeah, from
yeah.
the early '90s. So by coming to
Uh-huh.
Seattle, I'm almost in a pilgrimage.
Oh, yeah.
But
Sub Pop.
the yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And but this chap who's from a band from Boston way, called Buffalo Tom, and the guy's called Bill Janovitz, and he was doing a lockdown performance every Saturday for over 2 hours, just with his guitar and jump onto the keyboard, harmonica kind of thing, almost Bruce Springsteen style in a way. And then his daughter would come in and sing a duet with him and all this, and it was great entertainment. But then I think he did 10 weeks every Saturday. Did it, and then it's kind of like, okay, lockdown's finishing. Or easing, so I'm not going to do it anymore, and I'm really missing those performances. Because y- you need that interaction, you need that kind of culture, and it's lacking massively at the moment. And I mean, we just don't know when it's all going to kick back in, do we? Um,
Yeah.
it's terrible, but at least you. So, so what do you use to connect then? Is it? I'm going to say I'm going to be have a swear word here and say, do you use Zoom?
Well, it's not a swear word, and, I think we've realized that, Zoom definitely had features that people wanted, like what we call the Brady Bunch mode based on our, American TV ending series, right? We could see
Yeah,
everybody on the
yeah,
screen at the
yeah,
same time. And Zoom has come out, or Teams has come out with that now. So, Teams know that, people are going to use what they want to use, and they're going to use what's easiest to use. So, I don't think that it's bad to use a competitor's products. I mean, I'm definitely looking at, comparing them and how they work. But, when you get to security, what we've seen is, Zoom definitely had some issues at first with the Zoom bombing and the passwords. And, you know, one of the interesting things, Paul, having worked at Microsoft for so long, I've really seen Microsoft go through a change in how we think about security. And I can say this especially because I wrote the security documentation for Configuration Manager 2007. And I remember, at first, I think it was just, yeah, security is important. And then it was like, no, we had all these issues. Okay, now security is really important. And there were people there who cared very much about security, but it still wasn't really in the DNA yet. And then, there was a massive change. And now, security is baked into everything we do. It's not an afterthought. It's not, oh, go check this. Oh, do we really have to fix that one? Yeah. No, it's like when you have to fix something, you really have to fix it. And I think, it's for a lot of companies that, may have really great opportunities to scale. Like I look at all these, virtual conference platforms that out there. And I think, yeah, those are great. But what happens if someone really starts targeting them? Do they have it in their DNA? Have they really built for every possible case? And, it's a kind of hardening that you really have to go through, I think, to make stuff that's going to stand up for the enterprise.
yeah. And that's why we saw all these cases with Zoom, isn't it? Because they weren't being used to this capacity.
Mhm.
Everyone suddenly started using it for the obvious reasons, and then they had to step up to the to the I don't know what's it called, step up their game a little to sort out their problems. Whereas
Mhm.
I mean, Microsoft's reaction to the whole lockdown situation has been amazing, hasn't it? Really, um, even reading I think David James's tweet the other day that the new config manager is kind of dubbed almost a remote worker edition
Mhm.
because of the improvements that have gone into the product to help people. You saw a massive spike in shifting to cloud management gateways and things like that
Mhm.
over time. Yeah, you know the situation. You've seen all that. But for people listening, I mean, it's something they've all had to cope with. So Microsoft have really worked well on that, and also chatting to Aaron and Holly before, the way that Microsoft reacted to the lockdown itself and letting you all work remotely seemed to be handled really, really well as well.
Yeah, it's been, seeing another change over the years is, seeing the change, with Satya coming in and, the growth mindset and, really being part of the software community and, embracing the ideas of open source and just a lot of really positive changes that we've seen. And, so I think all of the transparency and the openness, there's a lot of talk right now in Microsoft about our values and how important it is to live our values.
I think we've seen a lot of comms. We've seen a lot of comms from Brad as well, haven't we? Brad Anderson
Yep.
around. He's been doing some stuff on LinkedIn, and
Yes.
it's just being open about the scenario that you're in. He's broadcasting from the kitchen, or not going to say I'm jealous, but sometimes from poolside. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Which I don't have a pool, so yeah. But it's great that he's got the noise of his wife crashing the pans in the background, or and that's the norm, isn't it? And we just have to kind of live with that. But the way that they got you working remotely, and then stating that, I don't know where the position is at the minute, but I'm sure I've read that Microsoft were letting you work at least until the end of the year from home, and there was no pressure for anyone to kind of go back in.
Well, I actually heard Brad say at there was a bunch of Houston user groups that did, a presentation, and they had Brad speaking there, and he said pretty clearly there that he did not expect to be back in the office, for a year, like, probably till next spring. And
Yeah,
I'm
no, actually, I
yeah.
I tuned into that. I remember, yeah, yeah, but the engage that particular event, I fed back to Adam Gross and said, "This is brilliant. It's
Mhm.
the best event I've virtual event I've sat on. It's amazing because there was a real Microsoft contingent on there. In fact, this was for Adam. He was like, "Yeah, I'm just about to go on after Michael Niehaus and present." It's like no pressure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's the thing. So who knows how this whole landscape will change over time, and I hope you can get that physical interaction back with your kind of dance, folk dance class and all that. But we just don't know, really, do we?
Yeah, and I think some of these things are gonna be lasting changes, like within the folk singing group, we've definitely talked about the idea, we have people joining us from the East Coast and Portland and, all over, and, do we do it as a hybrid? Because, one of the guys says, "Well, yeah, I could, hook up a projector and, still have Zoom, and then, people could participate there, and that's a real boon to my friend because, his wife was the one who did all of the driving. He doesn't drive well on bridges and freeways, which, he would have to do to get to this thing. So that would still allow him to participate, whereas I could go over there, although, getting to Seattle in the Sunday evening, it's like, "Oh, it's a long drive." So, do you just kinda slack off and say, "Oh, yeah, I'll only go if I can go virtually?" But the problem with singing is we can't actually sing together, which as we would do in person. So normally you go around the circle and you sing a song, and normally for that I would pick a song that has a chorus or some kind of refrain that people can join me on. But even if I do that here, I can see people muted who are singing along, but if they unmute, it's cacophony.
So it changes the dynamics slightly, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah, and the joy of singing together is the joy of singing together.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a difference. Definitely. So, Kathy, appreciate you taking time out to join the podcast today.
Oh, I'm so honored to be invited for this. I think it's great work that you're doing, and I love this because it's not just about the technology. I love if you haven't checked out Shauna Bang's Humans of IT community yet. The whole point is that it is humans of IT. We are human beings that we're bringing to this work. All of our parts, warts and all.
I did see that on Twitter the other day, and I cheekily tweeted with just a couple of jerks account and said, "Oh, and I'm doing this as well." To try and
Yeah,
get some promotion in there. But
sure.
no, I appreciate you taking time out today. So, Kathy, if people want to get involved, how can they get in touch with you on the socials? What's your tag name? Oh, I've forgotten what
Yeah, my handle is at
handle.
C
That's it.
yes, CXP at Cathy, Cathy. So C, Charlie, X-ray, uh, P, I forget what P is. P as in Paul, and then Cathy for Cathy. And because our
We're
team
having
is
brain freezes.
our now we are customer experience engineering. We were customer experience programs, I think, but CX is the idea of the discipline around customer assistance, and there are a lot of things that feed into the CX uh, realm at this point. So everything from from support to pre-sales, technical assistance, that kind of thing. And so I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn publicly. And if you follow, or if you don't have TweetDeck, you really need to get TweetDeck and set up a column for hashtag Women IT Pros, women plural, all one word, pros, and and I really encourage people who are doing events and want to welcome women. Hashtag it Women IT Pros. I don't own the hashtag. This is grassroots open source, right? If you want to welcome this community in, use the hashtag. Let us know what's going on. It's part of the promotion. Um, and then that's also we announce our Women IT Pros meetings on Twitter and also on LinkedIn. And we do have it's a private group on LinkedIn, but we will let anybody in. If you say you want to join us, just look for Women IT Pros, all one word, and you can come hang out. And we'd love to get more conversation going in there. Right now a lot of it's just me posting, hey, here's the next event, or here's the event. And we are worldwide, so there is a call. There won't be a call in July for Europe because the Europeans taking the summer, but we do have the calls in APAC, and we'll just keep cranking them out there on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can find us.
Cool. I'm definitely going to have to join in on the next one, I think. And I've not experienced it. And I'd be interested, actually. I was going to ask you earlier, based on it being advertised, it's open to everyone. But do you see many males joining? Or do you not get to see that information?
Yeah, I can see it because we're just on a regular Teams call. It's not a Teams live event. We aren't big enough to do Teams live event yet. I would love to be. I'd love to have that. Um, but yeah, I can see the names, and it somewhat depends on the topic. Last week was allyship, activating allyship, and we did have a lot of guys there, and I was really glad to see that. And our August call is also going to be about allyship, so I really encourage people to come in. And one of the things that was interesting was I was on an internal discussion for technical women at Microsoft, and some of the people there were some men who had been on our previous Women IT Pros call, and it wasn't even about allyship. It was about I think it was the one about finding our voice with Alicia Dara, and they were able to get some insight into how women think about some of these things, and adapt and cover, and just try to get by in the tech world. It was some insights that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise, that they were sharing back with the team. And so I just thought, wow, that was great. So yeah, I mean, it's,
Mhm.
and especially when if it's physical, Brad will sometimes come and talk to the women's group, and or other guys will come and talk, and they always have that moment of, gee, I'm the only guy in this room full of women, and we're all like, yeah, get used to it. This is what we deal with a lot.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I was interested in asking, because I thought, is it reversed?
Well, because it's virtual, I don't think it stands out as much as it might, if you were in the room. But the Grace Hopper conference, huge event, and they've really realized, that we're not going to get anywhere unless we're also bringing men along with us. So allies are very welcome there, and there are men who attend, and really experience a lot of what's going on, because part of allyship is really seeking to understand whatever group you're trying to support, whether it's race or gender or religion or whatever. You want to know where these people are coming from, if they're different than you, and how they're experiencing things.
I'm gonna have to look out for the next meetup, and make my way into that one for sure. I've kept seeing it. I've kept thinking I need to come on board and join in.
Well, we're also doing meetups in AltSpace VR, and if you haven't checked out AltSpace, it's really fascinating. It's actually owned by Microsoft, but you can go and set up free events, and you don't need a VR headset. You just need a Windows 10 app. And you can go in, and unlike Teams, where only one person gets to talk and then everybody else is listening, you can have
Yeah.
multiple conversations in the same virtual room at the same time. And if you don't like this
Somebody
conversation,
mentioned this. Yeah.
yeah, you can pick up and you can walk across the room and hear another conversation, and insert yourself just like you would in a physical space. It's brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. I saw this on Twitter. Somebody mentioned this. I can't
Yeah.
remember who it was. They were saying, "Yeah, I've just been in there, and this old VR." You said, "Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, a guy came to our meetup, and again, the meetups are women IT pros, but anybody is welcome if you just wanna check out Altspace VR and see what it's like. The next one we're gonna do is July 10th, Friday, and Redmond time, it's 3:30 to 5, which I know is late, for UK time, but we did have some people from
yeah,
Europe pop in and say hi, and, they were just hanging out on a Friday night and wanted
cool."
to check it out.
And when will there be the one afterwards? Because this podcast will probably go out after that. Will there be one around August? Did you say?
Yeah, so August it'll be usually we're doing the second Friday at this point because the fourth Fridays are the calls, and then the second Fridays are the meetups. So August 14th,
Sure.
Friday, August 14th, and I think that 3:30 to 5 is kind of working well Pacific time. So that's probably when I'll do the next one. I'll have to check my calendar and make sure.
Cool. Keep an eye out.
Yeah,
Cathy, as I say, thanks ever so much for joining. It's been a pleasure chatting to you today and getting to
thanks
know
for
more
having
about
me,
you.
and great to know. I learned a little bit more about you, and yeah, this is awesome. I just think you're doing great work. So keep it up.
Yeah. Listen to the other podcasts. You'll hear some some,
Yes, yes,
some
I will
crazy
do that.
things about some yeah. It's yeah. You'll get to know me a lot more through the podcasts bit by bit as I divulge embarrassing stories or whatever.
But that's part of being a human, right? Humans of IT.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Yep. So once again, thanks, Cathy, for
Thank you.
joining me this week.
All right.